Welcome, and thank you for joining me. My name is Melise Eriksson, and today we will be considering the issue of anger mismanagement in the juvenile justice system from the perspective of a forensic psychologist. These are the areas we'll be covering. Let's start by considering what is anger. Anger can be considered a process of three stages: experience, expression, and control. The experience of anger can be state, momentary, or trait, relatively stable. The expression is more generalized, trait anger, or anger that is triggered by criticism or stress, reactive anger. Finally, the control of anger is either turned inward, suppressed, or expressed outward, externalized. Cognitive processing and the underlying motivation of such anger-provoking experiences can alternatively prolong or disengage this process. Whilst a fundamental and functional human emotion, anger can become problematic when it is mismanaged. Dysfunction or mismanagement of anger occurs when the frequency, intensity, and duration of anger becomes problematic for an individual in their day-to-day lives. These features are considered dysfunctional when the responses to aversive stimuli are too strong, too frequent, too intense, pervasive, or prolonged, damaging to oneself or others, and are considered excessive in relation to the given stimuli. Without appropriate self-regulatory controls, the activation, expression, and experience of anger has a dynamic bearing on violence risk, a tendency for it to become the entrenched mode of reactions to stressful or aversive experiences, impairment of functioning across life domains, and related to increased involvement in psychiatric disorders. While anger is common in youth, it can be especially intense and difficult to regulate, owing to the convergence of the psychological and biochemical characteristics of their developmental stage. As the numbers of adolescents committing violent crimes with anger-based elements increases, alongside the suspected underestimated magnitude of anger-based problems, the importance of effective specialized treatment to support young people to learn to regulate their anger is well recognized. Violent offences are particularly concerning because they represent an overt pathway towards serious delinquency, including violent and chronic offending during adolescence, and increasing the likelihood of later adult offences and arrests. By effectively addressing anger, a known mediator of violent recidivism, such interventions can reduce aggression and violent offending in this population. Thus, today we will consider the role of forensic psychologists in the juvenile justice system and the assessments and subsequent strategies or interventions they can provide to address the increasingly common problem of anger mismanagement. Firstly, let's look at the terminology. Within the literature, the phrase anger mismanagement is described in a number of ways. For this presentation, we will use these phrases interchangeably. Anger and its variations, rage, hate, and revenge, are important treatment targets as they are identified drivers of violent offending by younger people. This behaviour may result in an individual's incarceration in a correctional institution, as violent anger-driven behaviour is interpersonally and societally problematic. This form of anger mismanagement is a pervasive problem within forensic psychology. It has been well documented that the rate and severity of offences occurring during the adolescent developmental period are predictive of later offences if emotion regulation is not developed. Specifically, maintaining or modulating the dynamic experience, expression, and control of anger through physiological, behavioural, and cognitive processes. The potential outcomes of such reduced emotional regulation are associated with lower educational attainment, unemployment, limited economic prospects, criminality, and tenuous social relationships in adulthood. As a result, courts often mandate anger management treatment for justice-involved youth. This group display elevated levels of aggression and violent behaviour. These physical, verbal, and indirect forms of angry and aggressive behaviour create short and long-term problems for the youth who perform such acts, as well as the wider public and community. However, the need for anger assessment, augmented by services to support offender readiness for treatment and reducing recidivism, are required for optimal therapeutic interventions. This provides extensive benefits to society and to youth, whilst also meeting the legal requirements of mandated anger management treatment. Thus, the role of forensic psychologists to provide valuable treatment resources to juvenile justice facilities. The goal of anger management is to reduce both the emotional feelings and physiological arousal that anger causes, thus learning to control one's reactions. It requires empirically supported interventions that target the specific dimensions of anger. The skills and competencies of forensic psychologists are vital to the development and implementation of such strategies. They can do this using psychological assessment, formulation and diagnosis, interventions, forensic interviewing, and research. Psychological assessment, in particular, is a competency specific to this role that can be used to take a measure of anger, assist in treatment planning, and monitor progress. In the juvenile justice setting, the main treatment goals for clients are to minimise the offence behaviour and prevent relapse using targeted anger management interventions. Existing psychotherapies for anger management are based on a wide range of treatment approaches. However, it is a cognitive behaviour therapy approach that has become the preferred method of treating anger in adolescents, particularly for violent offenders. We will consider the three aspects of the CBT approach: exposure, cognitive change, and self-management skills, specifically conscious articulation of bodily felt emotions, mindfulness, and timeout. CBT specifies that the onset, maintenance, and recurrence of emotional problems are associated with negative biases in information processing. They affect the way an individual perceives, evaluates, pays attention to, and remembers emotionally significant information. This approach aims to minimise the reactivity, intensity, and duration of anger and moderate its future expression. The process starts with exposure. Exposure to provocation, either overtly or covertly, reduces arousal to the anger stimulus, the habituation and opening the door to learning and utilising other strategies. Second is cognitive change, to adjust automatic thoughts and irrational beliefs. This is a process of changing cognitive distortions, which are considered the causal antecedents to offending. They are either primary, self-centered attitudes, thoughts and beliefs, or secondary, blaming others, assuming the worst of others, externalizing and justifications for behaviour. Finally, there are the development of self-management skills to increase one's capacity to regulate arousal and make use of constructive coping behaviours. These include taking time out to remove oneself from moments that are about to trigger overwhelming feelings of anger, increased emotional awareness and regulation through the conscious awareness and articulation of one's bodily felt experience, and mindfulness, whereby the individual can learn to be non-judgmentally receptive to the present moment. This is an ideal description of the process, but one that is harder to implement in reality, especially given the importance of individualised treatments to ensure the most appropriate treatment target and regulation strategies are employed for each individual. There are many challenges facing forensic psychologists working with young adults in the justice system with mismanaged anger. These are just a few of note. Comorbidities. Mental health problems are prevalent in youth involved in the juvenile justice system. As such, it is critical to understand that because anger is a very noticeable problem, it can act as an alarm of sorts that finally awakens adults to pay attention not only to the anger problem, but comorbidities like the quieter problems of ADHD or anxiety, which can often co-occur with anger. This can have a profound influence on the choice of treatment and its success. Second is the engagement, or lack of, by clients with the anger management treatment. Meaningful engagement is required for behaviour change, and yet the forensic setting can be described as one of client-resistant services, particularly when the requirement to attend treatment is legally coerced. Psychologists must be prepared to modify the therapy, the approach, the setting. In other words, consider the individual and the requirements for an effective therapeutic alliance. There is also evidence to suggest the cognitive, behavioural and psychoeducational approach to anger management programs are failing to prevent violence and recidivism. Whilst attrition and dropout rates of clients may play a part in the poor outcomes, it has been suggested that a CBT approach should be augmented by emotional process work. The idea being that the generation of new emotional experiences lead to the construction of new narratives, resulting in a new set of thoughts, behaviours and memories. Finally, a growing body of research indicates that harsh interactions with one's parents during childhood predict higher levels of anger across adolescence and a predilection towards negative emotional stimuli. The theory of effective learning proposes that these early experiences of threatening, inconsistent, or excessive emotional signals can lead to biased processing of emotional information. While psychologists cannot go back and change history, this may be an area where the future of forensic psychology can assist in the prevention of future anger mismanagement. For example, in the education of young offenders to use different parenting approaches with their own children. This highlights the importance of innovation in interventions for youth and juvenile justice settings. The complex histories, symptoms, expressions and trajectories of these young people require continued exploration of mismanaged anger and its treatment. This includes the further investigation into the reciprocal influences of gender, age and racial socialisation on the effectiveness of anger management programs, the long-term effects of interventions and the determining the potential mechanisms for change. Thank you for listening. For further information, please consider the following references.